Thanks everyone for coming. This is the Global Funds Reporting roundtable, or round tables, I guess. The idea is to keep this as kind of free form and flowing as possible. To that end, I've committed to having 0 slides, so don't worry about the screen. Yeah, it's just a discussion about sort of the world of fund reporting and where we are today, specifically focusing on kind of, I would say, the case of templates, but also encompassing other things on the forms and periodic reporting as well, should we want to move in that direction. The topic, which is not on there, but it's about the growing and disparate demands for regulation-oriented cost transparency and the consolidation of global fund reporting, which is a very complex title, but it basically reflects 2 key ideas, which is about essentially divergence, but also consolidation. So how do firms respond to diverging regulations, or to what extent are they even diverging, and to what extent can we as an industry try and make sense of it and bring them together harmoniously. So yeah, like I said, we'll use our sort of collective knowledge and understanding in the room. The panel here will obviously guide some of the discussions, and they are subject matter experts. So they will opine on on the questions that I'll be posing to them. But equally, I think at every question almost we will open it up, so we can have more of a discussion and questions coming in from the audience, and we kind of move the panel to the way that makes sense. So yeah, without further ado, let me get the panel to introduce themselves. I can start myself. So I'm Avinash Bhavani. I'm product manager for our consensus product at CSS, which is the periodic filing product, probably one of the oldest products in the CSS wheelhouse. We deal with the US regulations, PF, PQR for hedge funds, but also in the mutual fund space, around import and all the good stuff coming in with MMFR and all that other kind of form-based regulation. And that's probably all I'll say about our products today. Then can I ask, we'll just go down the line. So we can start with Darragh.
And then I'll kick off with you.
Yeah, no problem. So my name is Darragh Kelly. I'm also a product manager in CSS, and I'm focused on our regulatory data management and regulatory data exchange products. I've about 15 years experience in the area, working in product, project and technical roles.
Michael Sparks. I'm with Virtu ITG Analytics. We're a firm that specializes in TCA and related analytics and data processing, and over the last few years have become more and more involved in regulatory reporting or data processing, leading into the reporting for our clients. Background, I've been in that space for around 15 years, and before that I was on the buy side, headed up international equity portfolio management at Aviva, and before that Commercial Union.
Good morning, I'm Mark Sherwin. I'm from the Investment Association, where I lead on all our activities in relation to cost transparency. We've been doing that for a number of years, both from the presentational point of view, also from the technical aspects in terms of transaction cost calculations. Before that, I was in the industry many years ago with a background in valuation and pricing and fund reporting.
And hello again, I'm Ashley Smith still. And my other job, apart from introducing our company president on days like this, is I look after our tier 1 asset manager clients in the UK and beyond, and cover a plethora of reporting regimes. And before we kick off, actually, I just wanted to get a sample of audience really of where you are, so that we know where to pitch what we're doing. So my assumption is everybody's buy side or buy side focused. I'm just going to assume that's a given. I'd like to get a blend of sort of data and operations or regulatory and compliance. So if you're more data and operations, could you raise a hand? No one. Oh, one. Got out 18. There you go. Regulatory and compliance. Bunch. And then, so what do the rest of you do? We'll come to that. Legal, other things. And then from a perspective of, let's just be really broad brush, small or large. So are you in a small firm? Large firm? Okay, so we've got a good blend. So we've got quite a compliance oriented, we've got some data, we've got small and large. So thank you, that's very useful. Is there anything else we want to, no, I think that covers it. That covers it from where we are. Thanks.
Okay, thanks Ashley. So yeah, so I think we'll jump right in. So to start off with, we wanted to just kind of level set kind of what we'll be talking about today. So as I said, we're kind of talking about what we've seen coming down the pipe and what's next as well. And then kind of what's our trends towards in terms of our regulations consolidating, are they proliferating? Yeah, I mean, everyone probably in the room knows about kind of what's been the history of kind of the last, I guess, 8-9 years of regulation, and more recently with the templates as well. So I guess I can start with Mark probably and just kind of talk about what are we kind of trending towards, what have you seen in terms of consolidation of these reports. I know that there's a few that are coming up now that are trending towards consolidation, but maybe in the last couple of years, how are we looking at the kind of differing regulations coming up for templates and also other fund-based regulation?
Yeah, I think the plethora of cost transparency initiatives has reached its peak. We can't get more proliferation, so we're going to have to start moving towards a more coherent environment with some consolidation of that. We have too many regulations that are dabbling in cost transparency, even going back to the UCITS directive, which sets out some standards in the KID for disclosing management fees, and those rules still apply for another couple of years for UCITS because PRIPS has exempted UCITS for that time. Worth remembering as well, the level 1 PRIPS rules were made in 2014, and we're now more than 5 years after that, and we still don't have a level, stable PRIPS regulation and underlying technical standards. They're up for review at the moment, and we expect in the next few months to see what the latest recommendations, particularly around the transaction costs and the cost disclosure aspects of that are. So PRIPS is very detailed and prescriptive. I think it's set out to try and define the universe in terms of cost transparency. MiFID stepped back to allow PRIPS to do that, but in doing so, by referencing other types of products, so UCITS, for example, has created this dichotomy where you've got two sets of regulations feeding into the same set of disclosures, and that creates all sorts of difficulties and conflicts. On top of that, in the UK, we've had the UK regulator, the FCA, take a version of the PRIPS methodologies for transaction costs and build that into their own rulebook in terms of DC workplace pensions. It's a PRIPS-based methodology. It's not exactly the PRIPS methodology, though. There are technical differences in the detail that, while at the top level you can say it's the same approach, the detail means you have to do some things differently. And the FCA has kind of led the introduction of the voluntary disclosure for the DB pension world, where we've got the CTI framework, which really is underpinned by MiFID disclosure. So in the pensions world, we see differences because of that from MiFID disclosure being broken down by the CTI framework, and the DC pensions world broken down by the FCA's own rules. They come up to two different presentations of basically the same set of costs. So there's an absolute mess in terms of what's out there. That needs to consolidate. If anything sensible is going to be gleaned from the whole exercise of building these cost calculations and engines and presentations to clients, if you present something to clients and they have to interrogate what it even represents rather than what they can actually do about it, it's not really going to add any value to them, and it's difficult to see how it is sustainable as a meaningful framework.
I'd echo that, and I think, you know, if we roll the clock back to, I don't know, late 2014, the advent of Solvency II, and TPT pops up in working groups that you and your colleagues, you know, led the advancement of. It's just been an expansion of more and more and more and more. And from our side, we tried to bring a build once, use many times policy. And that to a certain extent has been absolutely impossible until quite recently. And we're beginning to see some of the initiatives that Darragh and Michael are working on around centralising cost transparency and cost calculations and various things. But it's been a massive expansion. I mean, question from us to you, how do you guys cope with that? How do you continue to expand, and where are the challenges you see? Is it around data access? Is it around access to people? Is it around understanding the regulation to your perspective? So just a little insight of anyone who's willing to share, what's the main pain point you've seen over the last 2-3 years of this plethora of expansion of regulation? Anyone want to offer some thought? Please.
I think it's everything.
Everything.
It's in your data, it's in accessibility, it's in awareness from higher up, from management, senior management. Nowadays they're getting a grasp on it. We 2012 when Amir came in and before we had Dodd-Frank, it was an harassment. Nowadays they start seeing, it took a few years, that non-compliance is really an issue. So the awareness is there, but if you go to the business, then you see, okay, yeah, we understand that we have to do something, but then it's accessibility to people, the knowledge. So I work as an independent consultant for a lot of asset managers, and it's the same song everywhere.
So to Mark's point then, is the initial problem understanding what's needed to be done?
Yeah, that's the first step.
Okay, and that's at all levels?
Yes.
Okay. So then once you've done that, you know, once you've understood it, is the logic to then try and find something similar you've already done, or do you treat that in isolation, or how does that get?
What I'm focusing on and what I'm trying to get done is a regulatory change. I think MiFID II was the last big thing, so we should kind of stop working on projects, but start thinking this is, there will be tweaks. We will see MiFID 4 and Basel 23 and EMIR 8 or whatever.
Yeah.
So you don't need to set up projects for all these things, but you need to get it in. The people being responsible for it, people being accountable for it, and then you have to decide, is this run or is this change in your business?
Okay.
And that's what I'm trying to get in with my clients, the regulatory boards, the regulatory change. So it's really a change, the regulatory
It's a
environment.
very interesting point, and we've had a number of discussions with asset managers over the last few years, and project thinking was always kind of a day one scenario. Here's what we need to do day one. Day two wasn't really in their thinking to evolve, to bring in version 2, version 3, version 4. There was so much project work around the day one delivery, day two was kind of forgotten. And I think, you know, we're seeing some re-engineering projects now that are addressing the day 2 and day 202 type challenges.
And to that point, actually, we've had to, in that if somebody went live in January 2018 for PRIPS and for transaction costs, for example, they had an initial set of data. It was tactical and it was in some cases rushed. And we can see clients now come back to look more strategically, and they're looking to re-engineer. But now they have something to compare to, and they have published data that they need to reconcile against. So it's a different onboarding methodology that's now needed, and it's actually a lot more lengthy in terms of we've clients going through row by row, transaction by transaction for 3 years to make sure that they're comfortable with what they're now going live with, and they need a mechanism to blend the new values in. They don't, in some cases, in most cases they'll accept the new value to be higher quality, but they still need a method to blend that in on top of what was there previously, so there's no major spike or shift in overall transaction costs.
That's a good point. And are we still in the, I think we've got consolidation, proliferation in here. Are we still seeing a proliferation, or are you beginning to see a consolidation? So do you, within your firms, do you still see the requirements expanding? Hands up if yes. Are you beginning to see a consolidation? So we're status quo. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
So
what we talk about proliferation, but we also we didn't say the word, we spoke a little bit about prediction and understanding what's coming down. But what about, because we are global fund reporting, are we thinking also about how different regimes across the world are going to adopt or not harmonize, but give their own take on a similar regulation or template that may be coming up, say the UK versus the EU versus the US versus an Asian market or something like that? Have we seen or do we see anything like that coming down the pipe maybe, that maybe a firm can predict and can prepare for? I don't know, maybe Darragh, maybe you've seen anything like that?
Again, it will be a prediction. And I guess the whole equivalence question muddies the waters, because until that's resolved, you don't know how many different versions there's going to be. And even within a European jurisdiction, in terms of what we know right now, I guess until it's clear what the absolute end goal is, you need some consolidation to eventually get there, but how and when it's going to happen is very difficult to say.
I think if I can come in on that as well, you have to think what were and what are the regulators trying to do, and what will they try and do in the future, back of where we are now. And a lot of it is about transparency and helping the end investor. Now, unfortunately, I think it's done nothing to help the end investor. Arguably, there is more transparency, but these are meaningless metrics. And to compare Fund A to Fund B or Firm A to Firm B, it really is, I think, more misleading than helpful. Because every firm and every fund will have unique characteristics and unique aspects of its investment processes, which will then be exhibited in different cost profiles. I mean, we came into the world of PRIPS. Well, I was checking my email archive. It was early 2016 when suddenly this blew up as an issue for our clients who were using us for data processing for TCA, transaction cost analysis. And suddenly they started asking us, what are you doing about PRIPS? And we were scratching our heads thinking, well, we weren't going to do anything. And they said, oh, yes, you are. And so, looking at the metrics that are required, the benchmarks, the fallback options and so on, became very much part of what we had to put in place. But we know, and our clients know, that when they've got that metric, it's not going to help the client make a decision. Implicit costs, I would argue, are a vital ingredient in managing a fund, and by addressing any inefficiencies in a process and reducing those costs, you can get better investment performance. But there are some extremely high-performing funds that have high costs because that's the process that they employ. And so a high cost in isolation means absolutely nothing. And I think that's the challenge for the regulators now, to row back on this ambition of implicit cost transparency will allow clients to determine which is the best fund. Forget it, it's not going to happen.
Mark said, sorry, do you see any potential for consolidation in terms of some of the transaction cost methodologies? And is there any hope for the industry that we'll start to see some of the algorithms converge on a single approach?
I think in time that will happen. At the moment, we have, in the MiFID world, you can use any appropriate methodology. PRIPS defines a more rigorous methodology, but you don't have to use that in MiFID. And in fact, the UK is probably far more advanced in using that because it also has the PRIPS methodology in the DC pensions world. If you look at France or Germany, their MiFID disclosures hardly touch the slippage calculation from PRIPS at all. France in particular, I don't think there's any use of slippage. They say fundamentally you can't use it. The Germans raise legal issues about using it because it captures market noise. So MiFID is allowing this choice of alternative approaches, at least for the period of the UCITS exemption. Once that expires, then there's a kind of point, right, so now we've only got a PRIPS approach, UCITS are within the PRIPS environment, if they're sold as PRIPS, then they'll need to follow the PRIPS methodology, and therefore that's their regulatory disclosure that will have to feed through to MiFID. So the regulations will force convergence at that level.
Yeah.
Step down a level from that, and as Michael says, there's all sorts of complexities in kind of waterfalls and approaches that exist within MiFID. We also have MiFID open at the moment, and we're waiting to see what amendments come through in the transaction cost rules in the detailed technical specifications. We'll have sight of that in a couple of months, probably, in terms of the advice that goes to the Commission. But also in the UK's context, we may not implement those. We may take the FCA's path, which, as we can see from their initiatives in workplace pensions, is to go down that slippage route. So what we could see bizarrely is the Europeans were able to have the regulatory relaxation that politically we're striving for, while we stick to the rigid, supposedly European methodologies that are in place.
I guess both yourself and Michael are close to some of the decision makers that are involved in the consultation that's going on in the background around PRIPS in particular. And since PRIPS looks like it's going to define what will happen with uses, are we hearing, is there any background noises you can share with us about what that future landscape might look like post the consultation?
We can speculate. We can speculate. The FCA have been a major player in making European rules, particularly in the investor protection arena. Now, if you think back to RDR, for example, that's an FCA UK initiative. In the current MiFID review, we see questions coming through: should there be a ban on inducements? Should there be professional qualifications for giving advice on investments? Those are RDR type of questions being shaped in the MiFID consultation now. We see, when we look back over the transaction cost evolution, that the DWP FCA put forward this idea of slippage. The European authorities used that, they made reference to that in the evolution of the PRIPS methodology. The FCA have led the charge here. So we can speculate that they are the makers of these rules. So as we go forward, I think it's fair to assume that the FCA's model is what will continue, which is slippage, an amendment for bonds, which we've just seen them implement for the workplace pensions, dabbling around the edges with trying to kind of paper over the cracks of negative costs by trying to hide them from view, but without fixing the underlying cause. The PRIPS consultation looked at broadly the same types of things, and while there's all sorts of feedbacks from different jurisdictions around Europe, my prediction would be that where it lands will be very close to where the FCA workplace pension rules sit now.
I think that, I go along with it. I think that slippage or implementation shortfall will remain a core ingredient, and there may be adjustments around the edges and some nuances, in negative costs and so on. And what that is saying is the price will move when you're buying or when you're selling, and if you're the larger the order and the larger the trade, the more the price is likely to move. And the question is again, my earlier point, is firm A better at managing that process than firm B? I would assume that's in people's minds, at least when we look at those numbers. I think that the FCA get that, and so that will be a core thread through it goes forward. I think that HM Treasury will also play a role, maybe not in the detail, but in the overarching direction of regulation and structural issues. And they're producing a white paper, I think, in April or May, about the future of financial services. And again, with Brexit in mind, that will be a key indicator for the direction of travel. One other thing, though, I just wanted to say, and it kind of is tangential but related, In the earlier session, we heard about a pushback in continental Europe on research, and if there were to be an element of research, again, coming back into fund costs, I think that, again, looking at the broader picture of fund costs and charges, not just implementation shortfall, but the explicit cost of commission, including research, becomes a really hot topic once again. And you know, at the end of the day, we're not an island. I know we are, but we're not. We are part of a global financial services community with global funds and global asset management firms that want more or less consistency across the board in things like research. That's a challenge.
Actually, extend that point further then, yeah. So yeah, I can, not picking on names, but I can see Johnny and Christian in the audience who work for large cross-border asset managers. So are we saying there's an increasing divergence in their likely processes?
People are generally applying the most stringent criteria across the board because it's a nightmare not to try and, you know, and obviously if you have to adjust for a particular form of reporting in one jurisdiction over another, you do that. But at least, you know, things like unbundling research. In the US, people have been doing it because they've got to do it in other countries and other regions.
Rather than that, Johnny, Christian, from your side, you know, cross-border asset managers, you face all the nuances of reporting in Germany, France, UK. From your side, are you seeing, or from what you discussed with your peers, are you seeing it increasingly difficult to bring a single process to answer these things? Are you seeing divergence from what the folks in Germany want to France? How are you seeing the immediate shorter-term landscape? Okay, Christian.
All right, so yeah, first I would like to second the comment from Michael about the implicit cost. Because yeah, we can see a lot of pressure, especially from the sales team, whenever they request EMT, the latest EMT, and they ask, well, why is it the implicit cost so high? But you can't look into it alone, you need to have it in conjunction with the performance and everything. So this is the spot on. And in terms of the requests, I mean, we get all various different requests from different clients, you know, that people banging on the CTR already, but we all know that it still has some time to accommodate this. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, it's
so the volume of requests is increasing and differing?
Yes, it is different, and we can't see any consolidation. We try to obviously push them to use the EMTs and the standard templates, but there are always bespoke requests and, you know, slight changes. Which,
I don't know, Johnny, you see?
Yeah, I think, just like relax. I think at first, I think probably naively we thought that, you know, there'd be a standardised template, standardised methodology, and we would follow that, and which has been the case to a certain degree, but then it goes back to the client and then coming back and they've got their own requirements and customising that. I know we had a lot of challenges to Germany, some of the other countries, and the different template there, the WM Datsun one, but then even we've got a large book of business that's directly applying to the servicing for those, for the clients that directly register on the fund register, and how we provide some of the statements and reporting for those accounts. So some of those regulations were for the distributors that were, you know, on them to basically provide some of that, but they needed support with that, especially some of the smaller financial advisors in Germany. So that was quite a big challenge because that wasn't a regulation directly on us, or, you know, not be impacted by that. But then they needed help in terms of them meeting that regulation, so then the servicing of that and providing sort of tools on the website and statements and calculators and things like that to support them. So I think that threw up a few challenges of, you know, along the way as well, and I guess going forward as well, I think it would say.
And Caroline, from a non-operational, from a business sponsor, business owner perspective, is that increasingly the challenge for you to be a cross-border asset manager? You're having to accommodate more regional, more nuanced requirements. Are you trying to drive standardisation? How is that affecting you as a?
Yeah, as Johnny said, our key thing was to see could we have standardisation across the board, and that was our starting point. What we have done though is we have brought all of these regulations in under one umbrella. So we have a group of people, to your earlier question about having the right people, access to the data, understanding the is to make sure you have that understanding and knowledge. And I'd say that the challenge for us continues to be more driven by, from a client perspective, you know, and a big piece is actually in Germany. That to us is where we're seeing the greatest challenge, or I would say the greatest number of requirements, very specific requirements from different distributors. Their view, their take on some of the data elements, and that is happening on an ongoing basis. So that to me is interesting, it's just even within some of the different markets, is that even within that market, there isn't a standard approach either. So that's another challenge.
So these harmonising directives haven't quite harmonised?
Yes, absolutely. And then you look at Poland and what they're doing as it relates to MiFID as well.
Sorry, Caroline, is that focused more on MiFID than anything else? Those types of questions?
Yeah, most of it is relating to MiFID than
Thank you.
So it seems like, I mean, we're talking a lot about standardization, and then to what extent can we even standardize? Because if we talk about, I mean, with the point we brought up about people going down the route of the most stringent one, because that's probably the lowest common multiple. How do people in the room kind of feel about that? Would you agree with that, or do you think there's different strategies to do in different markets based on what's required in that market? Is that better for kind of the business strategy, or is it, you know, going down the route of standardization, getting the most detailed information that you can, and just providing that where necessary instead of kind of rolling it up?
So delivering everyone to the FCA standard is what we're kind of saying.
Right. Does that even make sense from a business perspective, or, you know, what are the different kind of approaches, I guess, in the room for that, or if you have seen by working with firms what the different approaches are to dealing with that?
Any thoughts?
Well, I guess when it comes to standardization, there's different areas of standardization. So regulation is one, which Michael and Mark have spoken to. And then you've got standardization of, from a technical point of view, so to deliver to that regulation. So you also have, from an organizational perspective, you can also then look to standardize at all levels, and ideally you're getting the efficiencies and the synchronicity across all of those functions to truly deliver as efficiently as possible. But it's different. It's difficult. To the points earlier where you've got different clients looking for different versions of different things, because it multiplies the complexity.
I think the danger is also it hides a lot of the reality, and partly this can be a result of technology or other limitations. We've heard a fair bit about data already today, and good data is an absolute essential element in all of this. So, you know, there are some people who are calculating trips using only open of the day prices, as opposed to the correct process, which is the centre broker methodology. We did a calculation, and over a 3-year period, if you used, in our client database, if you used open for everything, it would show a cost of 16 basis points. Versus the correct methodology, we worked out at 9 basis points. So that's a huge difference in percentage terms. And people say, oh, well, I have to use the open, that's all I've got available in my database. And it's consistent across everything we do. Well, yeah, but it's not right. You know, you've got to have good data. Fair point.
And Michael, do you think this market cycle could the current market cycle alter that demand going forward?
It could, yeah. Yes, rising markets would certainly penalise open as a benchmark.
I think it's worth as well thinking consistency's got many different things in this environment. Implicit costs methodology is one, but kind of step back a little bit. The implicit transaction cost number is one of a number of pieces of costs and charges disclosure. The next layer is granularity. You know, the UK model is to have a breakdown of transaction costs between its tax and commission and implicit and indirect components. So there's a breakdown. If you go into the DB pension world, that's also expanded across asset classes in the CTI framework. So there's granularity. And then there's the rules around it. So if we compare MiFID or DB pensions with DC pensions, they treat lending and borrowing costs differently. In MiFID, your interest payments or your stock lending revenues go through your ongoing charges. In the DC pensions world, which is framed around a charge cap definition largely, transaction costs includes interest payments for lending and borrowing. So there's baked in differences between the two and different approaches, which without rule changes is impossible to resolve.
So let's kind of, the other thing I wanted to pick up from what was said before was about the single, harmonization or single approach. And I know that one of the things you wanted to talk about was the CTI and its implementation as well. But maybe if we just give a brief into what's happened so far, and then maybe open it up to you guys to talk about your responses to kind of its implementation and the thoughts on that as well. Do you want to start with just like what's been happening with CTI in the last few months?
Okay, yeah, okay. The IA is a founding member of the CTI. It builds on our commitment to cost transparency, which is about being accountable for costs. We don't go out there and say you should compare transaction costs. We say you shouldn't. They can't tell you anything, as some of the panelists have already said. But we do believe they should be out there and disclosed for people to see. Going back to 2016, we were working on a kind of initiative to define a data set that could be the standard data set that we've been talking about here, that would feed out to different regulatory solutions. The FCA decided in 2017 that they wanted to take control of that, and they formed the IDWG, the Institutional Disclosure Working Group, which developed the templates that then became those adopted by the CTI, and we see out there in the defined benefits world today. The CTI template is a monster. It's got 200 fields in it, okay? But we can break that down a little bit. Half of those are about analysing transaction costs by asset class. Some of them are about kind of control of validation and a big data set. So, there's a load of flags like, do you use performance fees, yes or no, those kinds of flags. There's about 45 fields relate to specialist activities. So if you're a property fund, you fill out the property-related expenses. If you're engaging in stock lending, you fill out that section. There's a raft of ancillary investment costs in there that don't normally relate to asset management or fund management. They'd be provided by other suppliers to a pension scheme. Things like independent performance measurement. If an asset manager was performing the independent performance measurement, it wouldn't be independent, so you're very unlikely to see that cost field being filled in by an asset manager. Dismiss all of those, and you're left with around 45 fields that are relevant to core fund and asset management. Over half of those are things like identifying the fund, the client, the dates, the currency, providing certain reference points to reconcile to MiFID. Take all those out, and you get down to something around 10 cost fields at maximum. Some of those are sort of duplicated because it's got to cater for mandates as well as funds, so you're not going to use all of those 10 fields. So actually, there isn't a great number of fields, it's just a kind of more granular breakdown when you start taking your implicit transaction costs and spreading it across your bonds and your derivatives relating to your credit portfolio and all sorts of things, even though it's all part of the same mandate or brief. So it's big and ugly, but it's actually simpler than it at first appears. The number of fields is consistent with what was in the LGPS template, those that are familiar for that. It's consistent with what's in the DC disclosure template. So it's slightly more than we see in an ENT, but not really as you'd expect when it's from 3 fields in ENT to 200 in the CTI. So it's not as fearful when you get into the detail of it as it first appears. In terms of the push forward more recently at a pace after a kind of period of stagnation while the IDWG was having its deliberations, and we are really now in the throes of first-time implementation. The IA is fully behind the CTI and the use of the CTI. Although it's a voluntary code, the FCA have said they will consider interventions if the uptake to it isn't good. So voluntary in name only, I would suggest. December 2019 is the first big reporting period. About a third of pension schemes have their year ends then, and so that's the point in time that we see a real need for provision of the data in the CTI framework. Our anecdotal experience is firms are doing a lot of work to be prepared and ready to report on that. I would be interested to see around the room and any room I go into to see how people feel that reflects their own experience.
Does anyone want to comment? Anyone have experience or has been working with or following with the CTI in the room?
Yeah, we've got some challenges, as Ashley is aware of.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's highly hard work when you describe that only few of the fields required, and shouldn't be problem for our administrator and the provider to get this data, but I mean, currently they are still reviewing and we don't have any hard timeline or anything provided. So from their perspective, it might be more challenging than many people as well.
And I think to proxy discussions Christian and I are having with a whole raft of other asset managers is you distill it down in a very logical format. I completely get that. That data is kind of federated around 6, 7 sources of different systems and all these kind of things. So it becomes, back to the original point about understanding and interpreting, what data do I need to get, where do I need to get it from, then there's an aggregation headache, and then there's a consistency headache. So completely understand where you say 3 or 4 columns of an EMT translates into potentially significantly more in a CTI. I think the challenge that Christian and I and many others are discussing is actually that data doesn't live in one space, it's absolutely everywhere. And how do we aggregate and identify? Back to the original proposition is, at a senior level within the business, is the CTI initiative understood enough to know that we need to pull together a working group of 10 people internally to get this, to prevent federation, to prevent dilution. That's some of the challenge. It's logistical things. The theoretical interpretation of some of these regulations is reasonably clearish. Translate that into a real world in the BAU environment. That doesn't translate logically into what we see client environments, fund administrators, RMSs, EMSs, wherever it's going to be. We see that hugely federated, and the biggest challenge is actually sometimes just identifying lots of sources of this data. I don't know, would you see that from?
I would absolutely agree with that. It's hard enough getting data together from a couple of sources. We often have clients sending us OMS and DMS data, for instance. But you're absolutely right, this sort of data will come from a whole lot more than that. And interestingly, we have something probably around 100 clients in Europe, depending on how you define them, and 300 worldwide. I'm personally only aware of one client so far that has talked to us about CTI. And that may be because they're all on top of it, but I fear that's not the case.
That's a tad optimistic.
Yeah.
1 out of 300, wow.
So with CTI also, it's driven by the request from clients, and we are not sure how many. When we talk with our provider, should we include the whole scope of our funds? It's going to be a massive cost. Then they are not keen to provide it on the ad hoc basis, on the request basis. They want to have rules up front. So yeah, this is another challenge.
This is something that was brought up in one of the previous sessions as well. Like until there's more of a regulator push towards saying that you need to do this, the adoption rate tends to be much less, I guess, because of the pain involved in putting together these different templates and the cost involved, right? The cost and the people, time involved in that as well. Interesting. So then, to my understanding, so there's not a lot of reusability from other templates, or not the templates, but reusability of this data that would need to go into a template like this.
I think not obviously from what I'm seeing. Whether there's a commonality of methodology that's coming out of, I'll defer to you guys on, but from my side, we're seeing the challenge of where do we source this additional data first. So there's not a logically great, we can reuse this data set internally. I've got to go get a whole bunch of more data. How do I get it? How do I source it? How do I reconcile it? How do I normalise it? How do I, the full gamut?
I mean, in principle, the idea of having a sort of master template that everyone adheres to is brilliant. I mean, it would be great for the industry, it would be great for us in terms of the things we do with clients. And to hear, as Mark's saying, that it's voluntary, but effectively there'll be peer pressure to get everyone onto the template is great. I really hope that happens. I don't think it'll be instant, and I think there'll be a lot of challenges from going from here to a very, very high penetration rate.
What are the sort of incentives of getting on the template? Just curious.
I mean, I could give you one specific example of, and I think it comes back to end client driver. If you are an asset manager and you manage funds for the Fonds Reserve de Retraite in France, you have a reporting cycle with a template that you have to fill in within whatever it is, 5 working days at the end of the month. And if you don't have it, you're going to get kicked off. It's that pressure that you need, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you think, Mark, that we need to wait till it's going to be voluntary before this gets mass adoption?
I think it should be getting adopted now. We encourage our members to engage with it. I think there's a wide political expectation that we will engage with it. The conversation about pension costs is debated in the Houses of Parliament on a regular basis, which is someone coming from an accounting background and working in detailed cost transparency, to have the work you're working on debated at that level is quite ridiculous in many ways. But it is. It's very high profile. The press will be looking to see what the uptake is. They'll be calling it out if it's not adopted. The FCA will respond to that. They will ultimately intervene if they feel that the engagement is not good. 30% of pension schemes have December year ends. Now 2/3 have March, early April year ends. They're big points in time where there'll be scrutiny as to whether the industry is engaging with this. That's not just the asset manager on the push side, it is also on the pension schemes themselves to be pulling and seeking the information. Obviously the real test is what they do with that information. Is it useful to them? Do they actually make some sensible decisions as a result? That's a question that remains to be answered, whether that will happen. A big question. But the second phase is also questionable, whether there will be that demand to pull and extract the information from asset managers. But I think that the baseline is the asset managers need to be ready to provide it. It's asked for, here it is, and not to say, yeah, we're not doing it, we don't think it's the market norm. I think that's not going to paint the industry in a good light.
I guess none of the asset managers would say it to clients, especially the big clients.
So it does go some way towards the sort of the two kind of objectives of transparency and not educating, but kind of helping the end investor in a meaningful way rather than just giving them a bunch of data that's not as meaningful, right? Okay. That's interesting. So I wanted to pick up one more thing about the data itself, because we talked about how we can get the data in the right format, get the right data from the right places. Is there anything to be said about getting the data in a kind of smarter way? I'll give you so for example, you talk about regulations on the hedge fund side. We had obviously in the US Form PF and PQR, and we had Annex 4 here and a few other kind of regulations. People define things in different ways, asset types and things like that. There was obviously strategies that a lot of firms adopted and kind of doing kind of building blocks of data, so letting the data engines kind of work out what the right data was that didn't exist anywhere else, like a Annex 4 asset type specifically. So like labeling. So do we, maybe even in the room, are there strategies that firms have used to kind of enrich low-level data that you get to kind of provide more of the fields that are required in these templates? I don't know if that sort of makes sense or not. question perspective.
Yeah, I mean, from the requests that I see coming in from prospective clients, and this goes beyond cost transparency more into the hedge funds and Annex 4 filings and from PFMEs and AFMD, and there's an increasing desire to build a single homogeneous data set. Is it achievable? Don't know. To a certain extent, the static data that is reused across a whole range of regulations. There's regulation-specific data. We said 3 fields of EMT translates into however many on CTI. We see the same from static data, fund classifications, LEI codes. We use across the. So I increasingly see a desire for people to be able to build a single regulatory data model.
Well, actually, yes. The first question we were asked is what data can I reuse? So when there's a new template, how much do I get immediately from what it's?
What's the gap analysis to it? And we've seen AIFMD to PREPS as an EPT. 40% data was reused. Was it something like that we saw? So that means there's 60% new data to bring AIFMD into an existing environment that builds an EPT. That's quite a chunk still. It should be an incremental gain. So as you add EMT and you'd like to think that 40 got to 50 to 60 to 70. Not quite seeing that yet. There's not quite that same leverage I'm seeing from client requests coming in. I don't know from the.
Well, certainly, I think Mark mentioned it earlier, but in terms of the transaction costs, as they've evolved through the different templates, they've gotten more detailed and granular.
Yeah.
So I think we are coming to a point now that we have full coverage that you'd expect. Certainly that coverage percentage is much higher. So
the idea, if you're able to build homogeneous granular data, you can roll up in different ways for slightly less stringent requirements?
Yeah, so within the product we have an engine which would calculate, and we would know per client or per data set what we need to calculate for.
Okay.
But typically one set of data can calculate for many different regulations. So they can break it down into the constituents and they can be used where they're needed to be used.
Okay. And I think one nuance to the question you asked earlier as well is that this data doesn't always necessarily sit within one team within the firm. Right? There's an alternatives, there's a long only, there's a property fund, there's also. So there's some cultural, structural changes needed to go on at the same time as building this data set. It's actually firms organising themselves in different ways to get a global head of whatever this is, regulatory reporting, regulatory data, I don't know, we see it in different ways. It doesn't always, in some of the bigger firms, there's a distinct one-person owner. Some of the smaller firms, we see this as quite federated and quite a team challenge to aggregate this data. And it comes from a whole bunch of different places. So there is certainly a variation between smaller asset managers tend to have more federated data sets. Larger asset managers tend to have a more centre of excellence around regulatory data sets, from my experience. I don't know whether you...
I think that's absolutely right. I think there's also a huge danger in falling into the trap of assuming that the equity world can be imposed on any other asset class, and it can't. Absolutely not. Whether it's FX, whether it's fixed income, or property, even more so actually. But still a lot of bond trades are done by voice, and to capture that in the same way as you have a millisecond record of an equity trade or 500 fills of an algo, it just isn't the same beast that you're analysing. And the same with the market data. I mean, we as a TCA provider, as a PRIPS data provider, and so on, we get data from a client and we get market data. Well, in the world of fixed income, you've got instruments that haven't traded for 6 weeks. You're going to have to analyse that differently from a liquid equity, obviously.
Fair point.
Well, in the room, I guess, different kind of strategies or different kind of ways to analyze reusability, gap analysis. Any stories?
Well, just on the theme of standardization and reuse templates, I'm interested here in I'm seeing requests coming through on the back of IORP2, and some people are asking for PFP files, and others I hear people are pushing back and just sending on to 55. I'm just wondering if anyone's had any insights there, anyone been exposed to pensions looking for IORP2 data to support their algorithm.
It's a real pain in the ass. So we wish it came from nowhere as well.
Yeah.
It was kind of prepared for it. The client started asking. So we've been trying to leverage off the TPT version 5.
And have you had success with that, pushing back and saying, no, we're not going to give you PFP, just take TPT?
No.
So we've had similar experience.
No. So what I
So when you said you didn't get away with TPT version 5, was that the end client pushing back on the harsh question? Did they understand it fully? Did they could they?
I don't know. I don't know, but they just said no, we want this template. What we're working to, this is what everyone else is trying to provide us. They obviously want consistency there, and so they don't want some that may be prepared and have it, and those people are, and then the ones that want to send just on.
But then I wonder, is that consistent with what you see?
Yeah, well, the go-to is take my GPT-5 and prepare myself.
Yeah.
But people are pushing back quite strongly.
And then people, some want it on look through, and some don't want it on look through as well, and that's really.
I was going to ask Mark whether there's any noise on the inside of the working groups in terms of might we see an evolution in GPT to deal with this, or might we, is this even something that's reached the radar of the IA?
We're involved, I'm not involved in the TPTs for me to say much about it. A colleague of mine, John Allen, is involved and has been involved in the development of version 5. He would be the person to refer to on the evolution of it.
So forgive my ignorance, IRP2, does that have a cost transparency?
No, it looks, if anyone's seen it, it looks like an S or a QRT.
Okay.
Looks like the asset loan of the QRT.
So it's an asset look through type?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So TPT5 would be a logical.
Strikes it at TPT would be the logical solution.
Yeah. So again, that's kind of an example of, there seems a slightly more simplistic answer than the end client's willing to accept.
Well, it's also a bit, kind of feels, not to refer to regulators as idiotic, but it feels like IOPA, there's teams in IOPA that didn't speak to each other when, you know, the folks that worked on Solvency II and the folks that worked on IORP didn't come together within the one regulator. I can understand how CRIPS ended up so divergent because there was different ESAs involved, you know, you had IOPA and ESMA. And then ESMA also were involved in MiFID, so you could kind of somewhat understand how they didn't bang their heads together. But this is within it. Well, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got the FTK and the ECB.
Okay. And they're all nuanced?
Yeah.
They're all very, okay.
I do believe, though, the version 5 was developed with the IOR reporting in mind, so that it could provide the necessary data. But I'll pass.
Yeah, because they did have guidance. So when they brought out version 5 guidelines, there is like the equivalent kind of to say you can use this field for ECB, but it's actually not that complete, actually. And they're requesting more fields that aren't on the TPT as well.
The STS,
completely new fields.
the STS almost feels like GPT-5 is more aligned to the drive around securitizations and the transparency that's needed there, because that's then baked into solvency and the interconnections of the securitization regime with solvency. So it's a bit of a
There was another question. Was Alex, did you have a question or a comment about, maybe going back now to the point? No? So we have only a few minutes left, so I thought it would be a good time now to kind of allow people to ask questions about not just what we've spoken about, but if there's something else around consolidation, proliferation, templates, or even strategies, if they want to hear from other people on strategies to deal with these kind of things. Yeah, now would be the time to ask any questions that you may have, just so we constantly get enough time to ask questions.
Just going to ask a question on, not directly in the fund reporting, I guess, but as a result of it, but the feedback template of the MiFID and whether Alice also now or anybody else is, if it's very hard to do any work at the moment. I mean, today we have received a number of templates from distributors that's in their own sort of format. So it's quite hard to sort of deal with that information. I mean, at the moment it's manageable because there's only a few templates, but I think the concern was that we're suddenly getting into all these templates in the absence of a sort of standardised template existing.
Are you actively requesting those, or is this a distributor sending it? They just arrive.
Start sending it to you. I mean, the worry was when we've got obviously thousands of distributors, and we thought, you know, if because there was no sort of clear guidance
There was an initiative. We sat on a working group at TISA, or TISA, T-I-S-A, who were driving some standardisation of feedback template reports. I haven't seen that come through recently. I know there were some updates recently. I haven't seen specifics of the templates being published.
I guess we added a lot of support for the demand for it.
Yeah, also someone quite a little comment on that, and then recently one of our compliance guys, they attended an ALPI meeting, so where it seems to
And was TISA, because it's interesting how the TISA liquid transfer exposed. It's used all over Europe now.
yeah.
Do the timing plans, which is
Yeah,
TISA templates, whatever you know TISA.
So I think it was at this ALPI meeting last week, tomorrow with the compliance really online and what sort of came out of that, so it still seems that there's quite a lot of conversation.
There was quite a lot of support from TISA and from PINFA around the standardising of the FT, the feedback template.
Yeah, there's an EFT.
There is an EFT in development by the Financial Data Exchange, the body that's kind of looking after all of these templates now, and developed the last version of the EMT. It's in development. There is a consultation out there. The national associations on that group have kind of consulted with members about some of the kind of detailed specification that they want to see. The idea being that gets coordinated up by kind of regional, national territory, and fed back into the working group. So that's the kind of stage that's at the moment. We, for example, have a circular out consulting and asking a series of questions about what managers want to see in terms of the specification coming back. So there is opportunity to engage in that and help shape what that might be, with a view to there being a standard, and you don't get this distributor proliferation of variation.
Yeah, and is there a view on how asset managers should be using that data that's coming back? Because I think there seems to be some sort of different views on that. My understanding is not to sort of police those distributors, they've got their own sort of requirements and things they've got to meet, whereas it's more from a product governance and to, you take that data, look at the feedback, and then you can sort of see trends that, okay, well, number of distributors selling outside the tag market, maybe we need to go back and revisit that from
When the whole thing first kicked off, I remember quite a large asset manager saying to me, I'm not asking for the data, because then I haven't got to do anything with it. And it was quite disparate, what was coming back originally. I think the original idea was that it fed back into the product governance, target market definitions and all those good things as well. Is that happening? Not really, because the data coming back is sporadic and in different formats. So to the earlier point, can you compare like with like feedback from the distributor when you're getting it in different formats with different colours and flavours? So to my perspective, it's an initiative that's gone quite quiet with our clients because the adoption hasn't been sufficient to drive any consistency yet. But I don't know if Darragh, you're seeing different or...
No, we put live an early version of the EFT.
Yep.
Again, the uptake has been very small. Very limited demand.
Answers to, even within the same regulator, to different kind of regulations or different requirements. Is there a feeling that regulators are not to use the word obliged, but kind of should do more with each other to kind of bring a more harmonious approach, or not have so many kind of overlapping things that people have to feed different regulators, but should there be more of a harmonized approach, and should the kind of fund management industry be lobbying for something like that?
Yes.
And how would we kind of provide you with
How
that?
do you go about it? That's the tough bit.
Yeah.
In theory, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about standardisation, we're talking about build once, reuse many times, tactical into strategic, it needs a whole mass adoption. How do we get there? I have no clue. I'm the wrong one, I don't know. You guys might have more insights from that.
Yeah, I would say a yes to the kind of headline question, harmonisation is good. We want standards, that's what all our members say to us, we want everything to be done the same way for every regulation. And yet we're in a political climate where politically we want to be seen to diverge, not just diverge, but be seen to diverge, to make our sovereignty count. So where that's going to play out remains to be seen. As I said before, a lot of the investor protection regulation in Europe comes from the FCA's initiation, and so it is UK made Nevertheless, the politics are that we want to step away from it. So how that plays out, it's not going to be too helpful.
Yeah, I think regulatory arbitrage is a very dangerous game to play. I also think that what we're seeing in recent times in the asset management industry is very telling. The consolidation, the move from active to passive. The cost of regulation is so high. There's clearly a need to have as much harmonisation as possible. High standards, but harmonised standards. And I really do, someone who's worked in asset management and asset management related activities all my working life, I really do fear for the ecosystem with what's going on at the moment. And regulation is not the only part of it, but it's an important part of that.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that, or any kind of experiences you've had with people trying to lobby regulators or anything like that? I mean, the idea that obviously, like we said in the previous talk, regulation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It depends on the political climate, the market climate as well. But to the extent that the regulations are kind of a proponent of the political view that the country wants to take, I feel like it's more detrimental to the investors in the end. So how does an investor sort of reconcile the regulatory arbitrage, seeing one number in France versus one number in the UK? So how does an investor kind of deal with that? And how does an asset manager keep credibility when they have these different numbers and different methodologies across the world? It's kind of the takeaway, I guess.
And also just one point to add, Abby, where if the end game is machine-to-machine driven regulation and changes and maintenance of the regulation, it's very, very difficult to do if there's not commonality. That's disparate.
Anything else? Any other questions or final comments from anyone?
Also have a question on ESG, but I guess it's the other session, maybe not that one, but just around templates and standardisation on that, or is that something for the other session?
Probably, but just to say it's something we're looking at actively. We've seen the beginnings of some ESG scoring mechanisms and benchmarking and those things coming to the market we're looking at. Again, we need to research and understand the methodologies behind those to see how they stack up. The next session has got way more content on ESG, but we're beginning to see requests for it and understanding what it is. We've seen some of the index providers, some of the benchmark providers come out with some thoughts on ESG. Every second email I open has got ESG in the title. It's not going away. It's something we're looking at across the organisation, and there's probably 3 or 4 different ways it can be sliced and diced depending on consumption. But yeah, it's absolutely, I don't know, Roman from maybe an ESG thought from the future projections, thinking.
A lot of it hinges on the taxonomies that emerge, so there's multiple competing approaches and different, lots of vendors in the space rating things differently. That creates some unusual results.
And that's kind of one of those things that has to happen sooner rather than later, because if you keep proliferating the different kinds of taxonomies, you lose kind of the point of what is ESG, and no one is going to believe, or there's not going to be a standardized approach to what ESG actually means, and then you kind of stuck with multiple different methodologies. So
I think that's Richard Darragh said earlier. The US have actually got a slightly more robust process in the US. I think the green taxonomy here will meant to deal with that.
Just one other topic, I remember almost out of time, but just to throw this out there, fund liquidity I think is going to be a really important topic over the next couple of years. Clearly the Woodford case has got a lot of people thinking about that, both on the buy side and in the regulatory world, and I think that there will be more, I've yet to see paper about it, and the concept of how quickly can I liquidate, or how expensive is it to liquidate, and what exit charges should be part of that. I would actually go further than all of that and argue that it's not just about, FPC talks about, the first person out the door does better than the 10th person out the door. It's not just selling, actually. It's any trading in a fund. what's the effect on the existing and the ongoing holders, either in terms of dilution or in terms of what's left for the remaining unit holders? And I think that that's a topic which has got a lot further to go, and I think there will be, both from a regulatory point of view and from an industry point of view, an expectation for more transparency on that question in particular.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, then we're out of time, so I will just thank my panel.